Well, a lot can happen in 12 hours, apparently. So here I am again. For context, yesterday, Sunday night, I recorded a video talking about my thoughts involving the Commander Rules Committee's banned and restricted list announcement on September 23rd. Our editor will make sure that there's a link either up here in the corner for you or in the description of the video below. So if you want a little more context about what's been going on with that, if you've been living under a rock and are part of the Magic community, I'd recommend starting there. Circling back around to today, after, a week of probably the most vitriolic, hateful commentary I've seen in the community, intermingled with a sizable amount of consternation, frustration, disappointment, disapproval with the idea of banning at least 2 to 3 of the 4 cards that were announced, specifically Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, Dockside Extortionist. Nobody really cares that Nadi was banned. It needed to go. We come to today, which is Monday, September 30th, where Wizards posts on their website that the Rules Committee has voluntarily handed over the reins to managing Commander to Wizards. This is not surprising for me personally. I kind of feel like it's been a miracle that 5 unpaid volunteers, as impressive as they are, have been able to keep things running as smoothly as they have for as long as they have. This should not have happened this way. I would have preferred that this be handled under different circumstances for certain, but the discourse has not quieted down after a week, and we're getting to the point where you have people on the Rules Committee and the Commander Advisory Group who are worried about their safety and the safety of their colleagues. And under those circumstances, it's basically been laid out that this was felt to be the only viable path forward. And under the logic, I can't say I disagree. But I can say for the roughly 10% vocal minority, as Louis Scott Vargas mentioned in a tweet earlier today, boy, the vocal 10% at the bottom of our community sure do make the rest of us look bad. I'm not gonna dive too deeply into a lot of points here that were in that announcement. There are 2 or 3 important ones that I'm going to touch on here, and this basically will serve as an addendum to my thoughts on yesterday, because I'm not fully convinced that we're out of the woods on this drama finally fizzling out. I have never seen a Magic event this dramatic, ever, at this point, and there are only a handful that I can think of off the top of my head in the last 15 years or so that would be on the same relative scale for comparison. Firstly, Wizards has said that they are going to welcome members of the community from the, specifically noting the Rules Committee and Commander Advisory Group, who want to still continue to serve in those capacities. Not necessarily in those exact words, but the general vibe was if you were involved in working with the format before, they would welcome you volunteering to work with them on it now. And I think that's a very good thing if Wizards holds true to their word. And there is precedent for that via the Pauper format. So while I am concerned about the conflict of interest of managing a community-driven format by a for-profit company that has very clearly prioritized profits over game health to some degree, you can argue the specifics of that as you will. Point being, there's a conflict of interest there, and I don't know how that's ultimately going to play out, but there is precedent that it can work. I'm going to choose to wait and see and hope that it does, and I hope everyone else does the same. The next thing that I want to kind of touch on is that Wizards unveiled what they've been working with the rules committee on as far as a new Rule 0 metric. I'm not going to touch too deeply on this because this is very clearly in pre-alpha stage. They are still fleshing it out. What they presented was not super encouraging to me personally, but I also recognize that there's a lot of room for discourse and improvement, and it is early enough in the process that what they put in the article today could be wildly different from what comes out in the end product. If you haven't seen the announcement, the short version is cards are going to fall into 4 brackets, and the card in your deck that falls into the highest bracket measures the power level of your deck. Generally speaking, staples are going to fall in the lowest bracket, and cards that are clearly designed to specifically win the game via certain combos or just by speeding it ahead of your opponents. I think they cited Vampiric Tutor as a possible example, but there are certainly others, are going to be considered at the highest bracket. And while I would agree that that might work to an extent if you averaged out all the cards, there's no getting around the fact that that is extremely cumbersome. And honestly, not a great measurement of power level. It's like they're kind of trying to take the existing 1 to 10 power level system and sprinkle in just a teensy bit of a points system, kind of like you might find in Canlander, but not the whole thing. They just are seasoning it very lightly. And I don't see that working any better than the system we have now. And in some respects, I actually see it working less adequately because a player with 2 or 3 power level 4 cards could end up in a pod with someone who's running 50 power level 4 cards. Like, it's not a good metric by and large. You need more to work with in that space, and it's already a system that's too cumbersome to work with as it is, so I think a different structure would be the appropriate approach. I'm not sure what that is, but that was my initial takeaway from that explanation of the new Rule 0. Hopefully they take the better part of a year to kind of suss that out and work with people on it, because I think it's going to need roughly that long. Is this change ultimately good for the format as a whole, Wizards running things? Remains to be determined. Based on how they've run other formats, there is room for concern, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But I think it's too early to see what the fundamental change in how this format is going to be managed moving forward is going to look like. We know there's going to be a change. There's no getting around that because you are dealing with an entirely new group of people in a for-profit company managing it versus a group of passionate people who are not affiliated with the company who are volunteering to run it. It's just going to be a very different set of circumstances. The last bit of interesting information there was that Wizards made it very clear they were going to go zero tolerance on harassment from anyone to anyone involved in this process. And frankly, that's a good stance to take, first of all. And it's overdue that somebody said something about that. I would personally love to see them take a page out of the Bungie playbook and actually have their lawyers go after the people who were dumb enough to send death threats without, a VPN. And even a service designed for anonymity did not save the defendant in the case that Bungie put up. So ultimately, Bungie won the case for this guy harassing their workers, their community managers, etc., and the defendant had to pay the better part of $500,000. I don't know how that's all sussed out yet. That wasn't really gone into directly, but actions should have consequences. And not all consequences have to be bad. Like, I mean, you do good things, you get good consequences. But if you are sinking to the level of threatening violence or verbally assaulting someone via Twitter or Reddit or wherever, or if you are going the route of generally attacking someone who is making the decision rather than attacking the reasoning behind the decision, you're going too far, and it's not acceptable. Like I said in the video I recorded yesterday, if that's your general response, you should just quit. Quit Magic, quit social media, quit the internet as much as you can, and go see a therapist. Maybe two. Finally, the last point I'm going to touch on. This has been the capstone on a terrible week for a lot of people. And today is the first day in a week where I have seen more signs of empathy from the majority of posts on social media than vitriol, than anger, than hatred, than death threats. And honestly, a lot of the people who have been enduring this for the last week are understandably upset. And while I don't care for some of the verbiage that I've seen, I can't fault them. And if anybody says they're surprised, I don't know what week in Magic you've been watching. We're all human and we all have a breaking point. Heck, when you have some of the nicest people in the community, I'm not going to name names, that's not really the point here. When you have some of the nicest people in the community who you would never dream of being able to make angry, saying that they're furious and that they're calling people out for their behavior in aggregate, and that they don't want to be associated with them any further, or that they want them to sit down and take a real good hard look at themselves, but, you know, much less politely put than I just did. The vocal minority has screwed up on a level that I think everybody's going to pay for in some capacity. Now, my hope is that ultimately the price we pay will yield a better future later on. But again, it's too early to tell that. And frankly, while it looks like the bullies won, I don't think many of them are terribly happy with the end result if they have any interest in the game as a whole. I know I'm not. This isn't how it should have ended. And we're walking a brand new path now that we can't really see the future of. So, Wizards, you have the reins. You have the ability to use Shield and Sword to deal with the people who are attacking the faces of your game. Don't screw it up. We're counting on you.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.